What is the greatest trick that Loki has ever pulled? Throughout his time as the god of mischief, Loki has conned and swindled some of the smartest and most powerful entities in the entire Marvel multiverse. He is a master of subterfuge and can trick just about anyone he wants in some way or another into doing his bidding. This means that there are a lot of contenders for what one might believe to be his greatest trick of all, and while this is certainly up for debate, let's talk about one of our personal favorites. The trick in question comes during the Acts of Vengeance event in 1989, which saw Loki manipulate some of the most powerful supervillains on Earth into fighting against a common objective to destroy the Avengers. It's important to mention that this event was driven by Loki's own ego, and the hit that he took to his pride when he first formed the Avengers. Loki was disgusted with himself because he was the reason that this iconic team ever existed in the first place, and had sabotaged so many of his previous schemes throughout their tenure. For this, Loki approached a group known as the Prime Movers, who were some of the most powerful villains of this age. This included the likes of Magneto, Doctor Doom, the Kingpin, the Wizard, the Mandarin, and the Red Skull. Each of these villains are perhaps known best for their influence. Many of them are very physically formidable foes, but each of them have a massive following or organization to their name which they can steer towards any obstacle should they choose. This means that this council, when banded together, commanded one of the most complex armies on all of Earth. The Legions of Latveria, Fisk's criminal underworld, the Ten Rings, the Brotherhood of Mutants, and Hydra were now all pointed towards the same target at the exact same time. What's so impressive about this trick though, is that Loki was able to make each of them believe that it was their own idea, and he tricked each of these illustrious villains into actually believing that they were in charge of the organization. But Loki, of course, was always the puppet master. Loki did this by disguising himself one by one as the lackeys or assistants of each respective villain. In nothing more than a white suit, Loki slowly began to plant these ideas into each villain's mind, and he bounced back and forth between all of them in order to get them to finally come together as one. Loki's idea was not to unite them all and all of the armies at the same place at the same time into one massive collective, but instead, he had a much more nuanced plan in mind. His goal was to shuffle the deck against the Avengers in order to pit them against different enemies that they were not familiar with, doing so in order to hopefully catch them off guard and put them at an immediate disadvantage. Many of these villains routinely attacked the same targets and faced the same heroes, and this meant that the heroes became accustomed to different fighting styles, armaments, and strategies. If the heroes know who they are fighting and they know them well, then they stand a much better chance at obtaining victory. But if Loki could shake up the system, then he might be able to pull one over on Earth's mightiest heroes. This led to a massive series of shakeups across multiple different storylines that threw all of these heroes into a completely unknown scenario. Most importantly Loki was able to prey on some of the most formidable and cunning villains of his age, and how he could force many fiercely intelligent beings to do his own bidding. All he had to do in essence was play on what they already wanted to be true. The fact that each of them were seeking a way to take down the respective heroes that had foiled them for so long, and has caused so much hardship in each of their pasts, so much failure. He preyed on their ego. Loki was able to take advantage of, more importantly, their bottomless greed, as they were each subject to their own hubris being taken advantage of, simply because they wanted to believe that the idea to join together was their own. Loki sent the Juggernaut to confront Thor, while Hell's Kitchen was overrun by Ultron, putting Daredevil against his own Avengers-level threat that he was unprepared for. The Avengers were faced with the Mandarin and the Freedom Force, while the Fantastic Four were confronted by Apocalypse. Apocalypse, who had famously been known as a prime antagonist for the X-Men. The New Mutants were laid under siege by Hela's army, and each of these encounters, along with dozens more across the world, threw all of the heroes into disarray as they were each fighting enemies that they were unfamiliar with. They each had to adapt on the fly to something that they had simply never faced, with varying degrees of success. Some of the heroes were overrun, while others held their own and were able to adapt. But the absolute carnage and calamity that Loki caused managed to completely overturn the status quo. This was perhaps one of the most widespread feats of absolute chaos that Loki was responsible for, And while some of his schemes before set the world on fire, this was the first to completely consume every hero and every team on Earth in a way that was completely unforeseen before. Like any other villainous alliance, however, this too would prove to be short-lived. Slowly, the infighting began to corrupt the group, with each villain believing himself to be superior to the others. The most charged conflict was between Magneto, who had survived the atrocities of the Holocaust, and the Red Skull, the Nazi leader who had orchestrated much of Hydra's most despicable calamities. These two eventually went to war with one another, and turned their attention away from their respective targets just long enough for the heroes to begin to take a hold of the situation, with the villains distracted. Dr. Doom was revealed to simply be a Doombot in his place, as the real Doom had no direct involvement with the plan. Slowly, Loki began to lose his support until the armies dwindled down into a collection of minor villains, ones that he had freed from various different prisons from across the planet. As the Avengers, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, Alpha Flight, and several others began to understand more and more about the conflict, they all turned their attention to the mastermind in Loki. These minor villains became more and more manageable until the heroes were able to win the day yet again, now with Loki firmly in their sights as the perpetrator. If nothing else though, this tale serves as a reminder of why supervillainous alliances never seem to work out. They will always inevitably crumble to the infighting and internal conflict that is bound to arise. After Loki was discovered to be responsible, Thor forced him to return to Asgard, as there he would await Asgardian justice. It does show, however, that Loki is capable of whispering in the ears of even the most powerful and despicable villains, and can manipulate just about anyone he wants to into doing his bidding. But this was one of the closest times that Loki came to conquering all of Earth, and he barely had to lift a finger. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of this and one of Loki's greatest tricks? Or do you believe that there is something else more impressive? What other tricks and plans has Loki played that have caused this much widespread chaos that consumed many heroes and many teams? Thank you as always so much for visiting the channel today, my friends. Hit that subscribe button to assemble and join our own team, and I hope you're having a fantastic day.